So, it's good to see you, Greg.
Good to see you, Meredith.
This is Greg Mueller. I'm Meredith Blackwell, and we're going to interview Greg today about his mycological career. So, first of all, where did you get started in life?
So I got started in life, well, we go way back.
That's what I want.
I grew up with 4 brothers, so I'm the middle, perfect child in the middle. And so what did we do? We went camping, we went out in nature, and that's what we could afford to do for vacation. So I started going out. I was going to be a forester. Forest ranger is what I wanted to be.
Where was all this taking place?
This was in southern Illinois, southern Missouri, and then we'd take longer trips. And that was all exciting. And so I took a botany class, and that was the end of things, right? So got really excited about botany. And then my to-be wife got a job with Professor Walter Sundberg at Southern Illinois University. And she told me, you got to meet this guy. And so I did. Took mycology, and now I blame her every time she complains I spend too much time doing mycology, that she's the one that got me started because she introduced me to Walt.
But Betty looks like she's been a big help to you.
Yes.
She goes everywhere.
Yeah.
Did she get a degree in mycology?
She got her master's in mycology as well.
With Walt.
With Walt.
And what did you work on?
So I started working on this genus Lacaria, this mycorrhizal thing. I did it for Southern Illinois. And I've been working on and off on this genus for the rest of my career.
You even came and collected some in Baton Rouge
I
one
came
time.
down to Baton Rouge,
In the winters, I remember
Yes,
it.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, but you know, the fascinating thing was, though, I was interested in, you know, kind of nature and the forest and whatever else. But mycology, you know, I didn't really see the fungi for the trees. And then, you know, Walt Sundberg opened up my eyes. And so I've been really interested in interacting with undergraduates and everything ever since, because you can't get excited about something if you don't even know it exists.
Yeah.
And so the role that mentoring plays is so important in that.
And your PhD?
So then I went to University of Tennessee, worked with Ron Peterson, and stayed with Lacaria. So I expanded and did Lacaria in North America. And that was a great, so kind of 2 very different experiences where Walt was very much introducing me to the world of fungi, and Ron really showed me how to be a scientist. And so I think that combination was critically important.
And you've collected with him continually, haven't
Correct.
you? With Ron?
Yeah.
So what about the work in the Appalachians? Has that been a special part of what you do?
Yeah, at that time I worked a lot in the Appalachians and the Smokies. It was great. I haven't spent a lot of time there after I left.
Yeah.
Because I was fortunate, as soon as I graduated, I went to Sweden to work with Niels Fries. And so Niels Fries was incredible physiologist. He figured out how to germinate the spores of Lacaria, and he was doing mating studies, and he was seeing that, these Lacaria leucatas weren't mating with each other. He knew I was he'd seen some of my publications, so he invited me to come over and do the taxonomy, and we worked together. And
I remember reading some of his papers about pink yeast.
Yeah.
And that was one of the first times I thought about fungi influencing other fungi.
Yeah.
And that really works?
It really worked. So what we found out was that the pink yeast put out some kind of promoter that stimulated spore germination, which was really, really cool.
Yeah.
Showing these bi-kingdom interactions.
And that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
It was a pretty long time ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you've done a lot of work in Latin America.
Right.
I remember hearing you give a paper in Venezuela, I think it was, in Spanish.
Right. So I can do a little bit of Spanish, you know, if we stick to things I'm comfortable with. But yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so my first real job after postdocs was at the Field Museum in Chicago, and they had a strong focus on Latin America. So I remember my first proposal I put in to NSF, which I was successful, but I had this naive idea of what South America was, right? Because I thought it was all, you know, rainforest, whatever, and then I got to actually started working in the temperate rainforest in South America and other places, and realized how diverse the continent actually is, which
And
was
no
eye-opening.
no one caught you on the proposal?
No, it was great. I would have never gotten it funded nowadays. People are much more, but not that many people, I don't think any of the reviewers knew anything more about the diversity of South America than I did, so it was fascinating.
As an aside, Bob Gilbertson, his first NSF proposal after he moved to Arizona was to look at desert fungi, and the reviewers said they didn't know about deserts either. They said there are no fungi in the desert.
Fungi, right.
So it's the same kind of thing. Yeah. So you're helping educate people.
Right.
So when you were at the field, well, I visited there a couple of times, but I remember in the early days, Rolf Singer was there.
Yes.
And why don't you tell us a little bit about him?
Oh, Singer. How long do you want? So he was definitely of that old age, incredible scientist, but totally the absent-minded. You knew when his wife wasn't there because he'd come in with like 2 ties because he didn't recognize it. He had evidently slipped one over his head and then tied another one and didn't even realize it. Or the amount of times I spent helping him look for his keys or his eyeglasses. But if you mention a fungus, he'd say, I described that, let me see, from here in 1949. He'd go to the publication and there it was. And so the other thing...
Had he been in South America then?
He had been to South America then, Amazing story of him moving around the world. But he published in 9 different languages. And so whatever language he was working on before lunch, because we had lunch together every day, he'd come in, he'd sit down and he'd be speaking French or Spanish or German or whatever else, and he'd just go on for a while and we'd all just be looking at him. He'd finally realize he'd just switch to English and like nothing happened and just continue on. So just an amazing person.
Yeah. So you stayed at the field a long time.
Yeah, 23 years.
Yeah. And
then so in 2009 I switched and I went to Chicago Botanic Garden.
I remember you phoned me and I was in Rome. And my phone had not been turned off and you wanted a letter.
Yeah, right. And I did not know you were in Rome, but
No.
anyway, yes. But you helped, and and that's worked out really well. And part of the reason for the switch, though, is the fact that I've continued to have this interest in engaging the public, and it's just easier to engage the public in a living museum than in a place where we were proud to say we had 2.7 million flattened flowers and fungi. Herbaria are great. I think they're most important things in the world. But to engage people, living material is just easier.
Yeah. And I think maybe when I visited the field at one time, one of the questions people had they were asking me what kind of exhibits you should have and what would I think of a motorcycle exhibit.
Right.
And so you had different kinds of exhibits.
I had different kinds of exhibits, but I was involved on a couple of really cool exhibits. So one of the things I did was I was the lead scientist on this exhibit that's still there called Underground Adventure, where we shrunk people down and actually walked through an underground environment. And what was fascinating with that was it was really easy, and then we did all this animatronics and whatever else there. It was really easy to scale and to figure out what to do with the insects, right? Because we knew that. But knowing what's the density of fungal mycelium should we put in there?
Yeah.
Because we don't have that information. Again, how much easier it was to work with the animals in that exhibit than it was with the fungi in that exhibit. But we have big mycorrhizas, we have rhizobiums. It's a fun exhibit, and it's still really popular now 15 years later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very lasting one.
Yeah.
So you have more contact with students. I know you have had lots of contact with students. And that continues?
That continues. I just graduated 2 wonderful PhD students. I currently have 2 students, one master's and a PhD. Through Northwestern University.
Oh, okay.
So when I was at the Field Museum, all my students were mostly through University of Chicago, and had a really good relationship there. But now, just because I'm still an adjunct professor at University of Chicago, a lecturer there, but because of proximity, I work with Northwestern.
Yeah.
And that's been really good as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Advice for students that might want to be in mycology?
Advice for students.
Or maybe to us, how to get students interested?
How to get to. I mean, I think the reality is, I always tell students, whether it's starting their program, writing grants, getting publications, you have to be good, but you also have to be persistent. You just got to keep trying and trying. And I've had now, I'm on my 10th PhD student. 9 of them have good jobs in mycology or related fields. So it is possible. Some of them took a little while. They had circuitous routes, but they got there. And so I think it's that persistence is one of the key things.
Well, yeah, and you're following in your advisor, your PhD advisor's footsteps, because he had a great record of placing students in mycology too.
Yeah. So I think, I guess people come and say, well, I don't know if there's job. I think you got to do what you're passionate about. If you're passionate about something, then you're going to be good at it, and you're going to be persistent, and you're going to succeed. To start with, I'm afraid this may not work out, you're kind of doomed to failure right off the bat.
Well, anything else to add that we haven't talked about? Some burning?
No, I think that, I guess one of the things I'm really keen on now and focused on, so still maintaining my interest in systematics. We'll say it's harder to get students interested in systematics. A lot of them are now doing kind of community ecology, so there's still a systematics component to it, but want to look at that within a broader picture. And then now I'm really focused a lot also on fungal conservation. And that tied in with our changing idea of species concepts. It's interesting how this all works together. So I think of Cantharellus cibarius. Until 1995 in the US, there was one yellow chanterelle. It was cibarius. Now there's like 30 plus. So when there was one species, there was really no conservation issue, right? Because if you lost it here, it occurred on 4 other continents. And now that we know that, fungi really do have distinct distributions, distinct habitat requirements, distinct ecologies, we need to start thinking about them just like every other organism. They're not immune to threats, they're not immune to habitat loss, they're not immune to climate change, they're not immune to any of these other things. And so I think that's an important message that I've really been trying to get out.
There's a lot more endemism than we realized. And also I think I've read that it makes local herbaria really increasingly
important, right?
Yeah,
because otherwise you had one species of Cantharellus cibarius from wherever you had it, but we need to do that. So I think that's really important.
And that's another thing then that needs conservation. All of these smaller herbaria that are kind of being lost in some cases.
And that's where then these new large digitization projects have really helped.
Exactly.
Because when in the old, you didn't know where things were, you didn't necessarily think of these smaller herbaria, but now they're part of this large network, and the value of them really come forth. So it's an exciting time.
Getting letters saying, do you have so-and-so, and then you'd have to check, and a lot of times it was file cards.
So it's really exciting, and all this virtual stuff's great, but then it still comes down to coming to meetings like this, to the MSA, because one-on-one interaction, seeing people interacting in person, is still better than a Skype conversation or whatever. So
it is. And the fungal conservation aspect of your work is really great. So
thank you
very much for talking.
This is great. Good.